What's going on, guys? This is Gainz Gaming. Today we are talking about the top 3 pairings for free-to-play players because I'm a huge advocate for free-to-play players getting the most amount of value possible in Rise of Kingdoms. If you are not yet subscribed, I am a sponsored content creator with Rise of Kingdoms, and I'm here to make detailed guides for you to help you improve your account and enjoy the game more. So without further ado, what I typically recommend for free-to-play players is trying to get one of each march on the field. Not specializing in infantry, not specializing in cavalry, especially not specializing in archers, but trying to get one of each troop type on the field. And one reason why I say that is because it allows you to go between resources. If you are only using infantry, what you're going to find is that you are only going to need food, wood, and gold, and you have no need for stone whatsoever. Or if you're only using archers, you don't need food whatsoever. Or if you're only using cavalry, you don't need any wood. So having a good mix of everything allows you to have a good mix of resources and not be dependent on only 2 types of resources. This allows you to reduce the cost of your healing overall because it makes it much easier to stay balanced with the resources that you are spending rather than having to have an excess of one type of resource. Not only that, but it makes it easier for gear as well, because when it comes to getting materials, you are not only going to have 2 types of materials, you're going to have a good mix of everything. Because for example, when you're chaining, you are going to be getting a good mix of the materials. You're not only going to get one type of material, you're going to get a good mix. And so if you're only focusing on one troop type and you're only doing archers, you're not going to have enough ebony and you're not going to have enough materials to craft your equipment. So having a mix of different troop types makes it way easier to craft materials as well. Because on top of that, when you open up equipment material chests, these are going to give you a good mix as well. You're not only going to get 1 or 2, you're going to get all 4. So having that good mix is going to be very, very helpful for you. And also when you're opening up chests, the list goes on and on. I feel like I'm just adding more stuff to this, but you're also going to have a good mix of blueprints that you can go after. Obviously, if you are a free-to-play player, you're going to be starting off with lower tier equipment and then working your way up. But eventually when you get to that legendary equipment, it's good to have that mix. Now, when it comes to the commanders that you should be using, we've been getting a lot of new commanders in the game, which honestly makes it really overwhelming to figure out what should I be focusing on because there's just so many options here. So I'm going to be talking about 6 different legendary commanders that you can be focusing on in Rise of Kingdoms that you can be spinning the wheel for and focusing on putting your gold heads toward those commanders and not focusing on the commanders that aren't going to be as rewarding for you. And what I mean by rewarding is that if you are a free-to-play player, you are still expected to carry your weight. Now, the hard thing about being a free-to-play player is that you hear people saying that some commanders like Trajan or like Philip are super, super good commanders and you should be focusing on them. But for me, I would say if you're a free-to-play player, you should not invest into Philip. And the reason why is because instead of buffing your allies, yeah, that's great. But as a free-to-play player, your leadership does not care if you're buffing your allies. If you don't contribute, if you don't get enough kills and enough deads, you're going to get kicked out. Even if you say, look, I'm using Philip, I'm using Trajan, I'm using the Epic Joan of Arc to buff you guys, they're going to say, well, you haven't been getting enough kills, you haven't got enough deaths because that's how we do contribution here. And so when you invest in these commanders that are good at buffing other marches but not as good at getting kills, you're going to find it very hard to actually get contribution in your kingdom. So instead, you should be focused on commanders that are going to get you the most amount of kills. Now, every KVK, I make a video on the best performing commanders in terms of kills. The commanders that got me the most amount of kills in my KVK, I rank them from lowest to highest. So I would highly encourage you guys to check out those videos as well, because what you are going to find is that the commanders I recommend here are the ones that are the best performing for me over the course of the last few KVKs. Now let's start off with infantry, because in my opinion, infantry is the best for free-to-plays. And the number 1 commander that you want to be focusing on for infantry and in general is Luce. He is the first commander that you should expertise when you get to the Season of Conquest, and that is after Season 3. So once you get to Season 3 and you are able to start spinning the wheel of fortune for commanders, when the infantry wheel comes around, you are going to max spin for Luce, or at least spend what you are able to in gems to unlock Luce and get some heads for him. Now, you should also be saving up your gold heads so that way you can start expertising these commanders or at least getting them usable. Luce, ideally you want to expertise him. I think his expertise is 100% worth it, but If you need to use him as a budget, you can use him at 5551. Now, eventually you do want to expertise him, but this budget could be viable as well. Now, when it comes to a secondary for Luce, I would say you actually have 3 different options. The number 1 pairing with Luce for the open field is William Wallace. Now, this is because they both have smite damage, they both are impacted by normal attack damage, and so that is why they have a lot of synergy. They work very, very well together. Another really good option is Scipio Prime. Scipio Prime and Luce are a fantastic pairing. The one downside here is that you have a skill commander with Scipio paired with a smite commander of Luce, so you're missing out on some of those bonuses. So for example, if you're using the wedge formation and you're gaining 5% more skill damage, your Luce is not gaining that benefit, and vice versa. If you're using Luce and using the arch formation, you're not getting the skill damage bonus for Scipio Prime. So that's one reason why the William Wallace pair is so good with Luce, because they both benefit from the arch formation. The third pair that you can consider with Luce is a commander that you most likely have in Season 2, and that is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is a killing machine. You are going to trade very, very well with Luce and Alex. Now, the only downside here is that it's going to be a lot squishier. If you get hit, you're most likely going to die much, much faster because Alexander the Great is obviously an older commander. He does obviously have the museum buff, which does give you some viability in Season of Conquest, and he is still a commander that I use. During this last KVK I was in, I actually was using Luce and Alex. So people are still using him. I still traded very, very well with him. And so this is obviously a march that you can still consider and still use and do very, very well in Season of Conquest. For me personally, in terms of just longevity and viability, I would say the Luce and the William Wallace is going to last you the most amount of time because these are the 2 newest commanders for smite damage infantry, which is obviously what they are gearing infantry toward. So if you were looking at something that's going to last you the longest amount of time, it is William Wallace and Luce. Now moving on to the second best pair for free-to-play players is Cavalry. Cavalry is definitely the better option when it comes to free-to-play players than archers. So like I said, I would recommend starting off with infantry, then moving to cavalry, and then adding archers. 3 marches is probably the max that I would recommend for a free-to-play player. 2 to 3 marches is ideal, so if you are going to leave one out, I would leave out the archers. But going on to cavalry, there are 4 different cav commanders that you can consider, and I'm going to give you different options for each of them. So the 4 commanders that you can consider for cavalry are going to be Alexander Nevsky, Hookah Bing, Joan of Arc Prime, and Arthur. Now, in my opinion, the number 1 cav march in the game is Hookah Bing paired with Arthur. This, I don't think there is even any consideration that there's a march better than this. I honestly do not think so. I think if you are going to run one cav march, this is the march, is Hookah Bing and Arthur. Now, there are different configurations that you can run with these 4 different commanders, and honestly, if you wanted to run 1 infantry and 2 cavs, I would not argue with you. I would say go for it. Honestly, as a free-to-play player, if you want to run more cavalry, I think that's in your best interest because they move around a lot faster. So if you do want to leave out the archer pair and instead pair 2 cavalry marches, you can certainly do that as well. But what I would recommend for these pairings would be Hookah Bing and Arthur, and then using Nevsky and Joan Prime. You do have a couple different options for Nevsky and Joan. For me personally, I typically like using Joan primary because you can reduce the skill damage you're taking, and as a free-to-play player, I think that is going to be more beneficial for you than the increased rage and damage you get from using Nevsky primary, but this can be personal preference. If you want to be dealing more skills, then the Nevsky primary is better. If you want to stay on the field longer and take less skill damage from AoE, then the Joan primary is going to be better. I've run both, I've done great with both, so you really have to figure out what the situation is and how you need to move stuff around. But if you are only running one cav march, it is Hookah Bing and Arthur. Now finally moving on to archers, I think this is the easiest one because it is Zhuge Liang and Hermann Prime. I don't think there's any argument whatsoever that there is another march that you should be looking into as a free-to-play player. These are the 2 commanders. Like without question, without shadow of a doubt, these are the 2 commanders that you are going to be using. It's the same situation as the Nevsky and the Joan Prime. If you want to take less skill damage in the open field, Hermann is the better option. If you want to do more damage and increase your rage, then Zhuge primary is better. For me personally, I use a Zhuge primary because your archers are already going to get hyper-focused in the open field. So reducing the AoE damage you're taking is not really going to do you a whole lot of good because these are already going to get targeted, which is another reason why I usually don't recommend as strongly going in for archers as a free-to-play player because you are just such a big target when you use archers. my archers typically don't trade all that well. So it's something you need to consider if you wanted to look in using 2 cavalry or using 2 infantry. And I'll actually bring up another infantry march you can look into, which in my opinion would be Scipio Prime and Ragnar Lodbrok. I think if you're using a second infantry march, this is the march you're going to be looking into, simply because Ragnar is absolutely fantastic and pairing him with Scipio Prime is just an AoE and rage monster. So I think that is a great option that you can consider as well. Now, one thing I do want to bring up as well is engineering, because this is something that is obviously relatively new to Rise of Kingdoms. And in my opinion, if you want to trade really, really well, and like you can do this as a farm account, you can do this as a free-to-play player, like you're going to trade really well doing this, but using engineering, if you honestly wanted to add in an engineering march, I don't think you're going to regret that. And in my opinion, the best one march for siege is going to be Gaja and Gonzalo. Gaja primary and Gonzalo secondary. This is going to be the best option for you running your engineering. And one cool thing that I actually did this last KVK was use my infantry gear on my Gonzalo or on my engineering march, and then using full T5 infantry with that march, simply because I just didn't have any siege. Now I'm starting to build up my siege so I can actually start using siege with the march. But for this KVK, I was using infantry and it worked really, really well. So you can still do that and trade fantastically. So again, the configuration I would recommend the most would be one of each troop type. However, if you wanted to sub out your archers for engineering or sub out your archers for an extra infantry or cav march, I don't think that would be an issue either. Even though archers, like, yes, they can do a ton of damage, as a free-to-play player, using archers is a lot more dangerous because they are so slow and they are so easy to kill and they are hyper-focused. So that is why I would recommend maybe not looking into archers. However, if you do want to run one of each troop type, I do think that is a great configuration still in 2025. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a favor, drop a like and subscribe. Comment down below what pairings you think would be the best pairings for a free-to-play player, and I'll see you guys in the next one.